Stand ready for my arrival, worm.
Dragonborns do not make any sense. Since the rebellion led by Alessia in the first... wait, no, scratch that. Since Miraak became Dragonborn for... reasons? We'll get into that later too. Dragonborns have been a key part of Tamriel's history, and perhaps even beyond the continent, and yet, just like their creator, father, and magical dragon sugar daddy, there are a lot of inconsistencies about what they actually are and what they should be able to do. So much so that people have begun to categorize Dragonborns into different types just to try to make sense of it all. If you've only played Skyrim, you might be thinking that the Dragonborn is simply a really shouty guy or gal that eats dragon souls and spends the entire time ignoring Alduin to, I don't know, pick Nirnroot and bake sweet rolls. But there's a lot more to it than that, and before Skyrim, the definition of a Dragonborn might as well have been entirely different. So let's have a closer look at the Dragonborns today, and hopefully by the end of it all, you'll get a better sense of what John Skyrim is, or just leave entirely confused, because lore consistency is a myth to Bethesda apparently.
Dov Walan Farel. We were made to dominate. The will to power is in our blood.
So, let's begin with the dictionary definition of what a Dragonborn is, and then immediately decide that it isn't going to be enough to work with. So, the Dragonborn is an individual blessed by Akatosh, the dragon god of time, with the dragon blood. That's kind of it. That's the simplest explanation that kind of covers all bases, but because it's so simple, it also doesn't cover nearly enough. Now you'll notice that I didn't mention the consumption of dragon souls, Thuum, and chilling with the Greybeards, but that's because this might not apply to all Dragonborn, even though they share the same name and title and supposedly the same blood. Now I say might, because Bethesda sort of just added these inconsistencies in with how they portray the last Dragonborn and Miraak in Skyrim, and then just walked away without any proper elaboration. So there's a chance that Martin could have Fusrodad the Daedra back through the gate if he had the training, but most emperors throughout Tamriel's history never show any signs of doing this. I mean, some did, like Tiber Septim obviously, since he has the title of Ysmir just like us, and possibly Remen Cyrodiil and his descendants, but the sheer difference between most emperors and us, the last Dragonborn, has led many to believe there are two types of Dragonborn: the Dragonborn Emperors and the Dragonborn Heroes, and these two are built completely differently. For the most part, it's not an airtight categorization, but it does make some vague sense considering that these two categories of Dragonborn might have been given the dragon blood for two entirely different tasks. Now if you look at the Dragonborn's name, in the dragon language, Dovahkiin, you might be surprised to find that it's only 2 words, because most dragon names and titles are made up of 3 different words. And Dovahkiin seems to have 3 different syllables. Some have said that Dovahkiin actually means Dragon Hunterborn, with the R being hunter and Dove just being dragon. This could also be a way to name these 2 different categorizations, with some Dragonborn being Dragon Hunterborns and some other Dragonborns just being Dragonborns, explaining why some of them don't have the same dragon powers as we do. But for the sake of simplicity and because Dragon Hunterborn is, well, a bit of an awkward name, we're just going to keep with Dragonborn Emperors and Dragonborn Heroes. So let's have a look at the Dragonborn Emperors first, since they have been around longer from a real world perspective.
Remember me, and remember my words. This burden is now yours alone. You hold our future in your hands.
Prior to John Skyrim and Alduin's gaggle of dragons rewriting the script, Dragonborns came from a covenant made by Cyrodiil's first ever Empress, Alessia, and the dragon god of time, Akatosh. I have gone over this in many videos, with the most detailed being my Pelennor video, but long story short, Alessia led a slave rebellion against some ancient evil elves with the help of what would later become the 8 Divines, with Kyne, aka Kinnereth, and Akatosh being chief among them. As a result, 2 super overpowered champions, Morahouse the Manbull and Pelennor, elves got to go Whitestreak, came to Alessia's aid, and after a truly ridiculous amount of bloodshed, even by Elder Scrolls standards, Alessia became the Empress of Tamriel. Her enemy, known as the Aelid, worshipped and actively worked alongside Daedra, something Akatosh really didn't like, with their most stalwart ally being Meridia, the Daedric Prince of Life and Light. This was probably a major contributing factor to Akatosh backing Alessia. So, when Cyrodiil's first Empress took the throne, she made the 8 Divines pantheon to keep everyone happy, and made Akatosh the main man, or I guess main dragon. Toward the end of her reign, Alessia made that fated covenant with Akatosh, in which he gave her the Amulet of Kings and blood from his own heart, swearing that as long as those of Alessia's line wore the Amulet of Kings with this draconic blood, the dragon fires would stay lit, and the rift between Oblivion and Nirn would remain shut. As Akatosh would be the king of spirits, as the Trials of Saint Alessia book put it, Alessia would be the queen of mortals, with the dragon god of time's blood giving her and her line divine authority. Theoretically, this is where all the Dragonborn emperors throughout Tamriel's history came from. This pact was their reason for their power, with their sole job being to make sure those pesky Daedra don't ruin all the hard work the Aedra put into making Nirn. This would then mean that the Dragonborn emperors would have a distinct beginning with Alessia, and an end with Martin Septim, since his sacrifice permanently sealed the rift between Oblivion and Nirn, meaning that once Oblivion ended, Akatosh's covenant would no longer be required, and the Dragonborn would have no purpose in Nirn. I assume that many thought this would be the last we saw of the Dragonborns after Oblivion as a result, since this is made clear in the game's ending. And I say assume because I was a babbling infant eating dirt when Oblivion came out, so I don't know. Still sounds like a better time than watching Cocomelon, but still we know that this isn't the case anymore, and the last Dragonborn kind of rewrites everything we know.
Such arrogance, to dare take for yourself the name of Dova.
John or John Skyrim changed the definition of what a Dragonborn was. Interestingly, there are many comparisons between the last Dragonborn and some of the emperors of the past, particularly Tiber Septim. But, to my knowledge anyway, this was the first time from a storytelling perspective that Bethesda had changed what a Dragonborn's purpose was. Instead of lighting dragonfires and keeping demons from storming the beaches, we existed to deal with Akatosh's rebellious son and eat a bunch of souls all Shang Tsung style. We had basically nothing to do with stopping the Daedra, at least until the DLC came along, but you could easily chalk this off as Akatosh realising Alduin was going to be a massive pain in the rear, and dusting off his old Dragonborn making skills to deal with him. It's like having the German Shepherd, a dog breed bred for, well, being a shepherd, then later using that same breed for military and police forces. And I just compared the Dragonborn to a German Shepherd. Ugh, I bet your dog meat is happy. Anyway, a way of looking at us is that we were some super special one-off to deal with a very unique situation. This is a once-in-an-existence event. I mean, it's not every day a dragon god fated to go full mukbang on the world is shunted forward in time by an Elder Scroll. But here's the thing, it isn't a one-off. Well, the time shunting is, but Miraak makes things even more confusing. While it's never overt, I always assumed that Miraak's entire purpose was to do what we did, except way earlier, but he didn't and chose a different path, as he put it, because, well, he's a fan of calamari books and calamari books. He is the self-proclaimed first Dragonborn, and whether or not this is true is completely irrelevant, since we know he was around in the late Merithic era, while Alessia, the first Dragonborn Emperor, was around in the early First era. This means that the Dragonborn's original purpose had nothing to do with the dragon fires and was all about vacuuming dragon souls, being the perfect Monster Hunter style dragon slayer and blowing up Alduin. Obviously, Miraak did not do this, and he got his butt handed to him by a dragon priest. But it also makes you wonder if he was the reason why Akatosh decided to bin off the Daedra with his pact with Alessia. Remember, Miraak went away from his destiny because of a Daedric prince, Squid Game himself, Hermaeus Mora, so perhaps Akatosh wanted to be more careful about giving away his dragon blood after rolling a natural 1 on choosing Miraak as the first Dragonborn. Yeah, maybe don't choose a dragon priest as the Dragonborn next time, you dunce. It also doesn't help that we don't know how or when Miraak got his powers, and whether it was before or after he became a dragon priest. Did he actually have a chat with Akatosh and was given the powers similarly to Alessia? I have no idea, and Miraak weirdly doesn't speak a lot before we turn him into a skeleton. Maybe the idea was to have Miraak take over Alduin's empire, and then, as the ruler of Tamriel, be given the Amulet of Kings to close the rift between Nirn and Oblivion. Alessia would then be the backup plan to Miraak's failure to take Alduin's place and rule with his draconic empire, but that's all theoretical. I very much doubt Alduin was able to predict the use of the Elder Scroll to put Alduin forward in time because the Elder Scrolls are outside time and space. This is all just theoretical on my end though, and I'm just trying to explain a bunch of stuff that I don't know. Miraak and our introduction also makes the Dragonborn a distinctly Nordic thing, since we, despite the race chosen, are still a Nordic hero and Miraak is very much a Nord. The dragons ruled over the early Nords, aka Atmorans before they even came to Skyrim, and Miraak was one of those proto-Nords. As a result, Alessia then comes across as someone chosen by circumstance, which could be why Akatosh only made her Dragonborn after the majority of the fighting was done, and he was sure she wasn't going to do a Miraak. So Miraak, and lore we learn in Skyrim, recontextualizes the whole Dragonborn thing, potentially, although it might be easier to think of him, and thus the last Dragonborn, as an entirely different entity that just so happens to share the same name. Why do I say this? Well, Uriel Septim is busy doing this instead of this, and you're more likely to find a Dragonborn Emperor without the crazy shouting powers than with, although the problem with this compartmentalization is that there is some overlap. The Blades learned of the Dragon Soul consuming powers of the Dragonborn through the Dragon Guard. God, that's a lot of dragons in a single sentence, and these guys were active throughout the rule of Remen Cyrodiil and his descendants. Then there's obviously Tiber Septim shouting up literal storms, so it sounds like these Dragonborn Emperors aren't too different to us and Miraak, except they didn't have to deal with as many dragons as we do. If this is the case, then it's assumed that all Dragonborns have the same powers or potential to have these powers, so why aren't all the heirs put in a Dragonborn bootcamp to train them up before they take the throne and make them powerful military assets? It's not like the people of Tamriel don't know how much of an asset an OP warrior with the voice is. Morehouse was a massive weapon for Alessia's rebellion, Remen's line went around slaying dragons, and Tiber Septim conquered half of Tamriel with his voice, then used the Numidium to conquer the other half. Tiber even set up the Imperial College of the Voice in Markarth to teach the Thu'um as a way of war like the old days, so why aren't his descendants all packing some draconic heat? This partially comes down to Imperial narrative, which we'll get into later, but another explanation comes from Akatosh not giving them these specific powers, as they aren't Dragonborn heroes like us, Miraak, and I guess the overlapping Tiber Septim and Remen Cyrodiil, which is a pretty common theory, but why not? saying that these Dragonborn Emperors have the dragon blood, so they can use the Amulet of Kings but not the dragon soul to do all the soul sucking and Thum shouting is something that makes sense, but only to a certain extent, because again, there is some overlap between the two different types of Dragonborn. Another thing adding to the confusion is that the bloodline and descendants don't really have as much to do with being a Dragonborn Emperor as you might initially think.
That task falls to others. Farewell. You've been a good friend in the short time that I've known you, but now I must go. The dragon waits.
Okay, so this section is a part of the video that I struggle to make much sense of. We've stated before that the entire point of giving Alessia the dragon blood and the Amulet of Kings is so her descendants can safeguard the dragon fires, but unless the family tree gets way more complicated than I realise, considering that it's already pretty complicated, it doesn't seem like you have to be related to Alessia, or even another Dragonborn Emperor for that matter, to wear the Amulet of Kings. Obviously you can point to the founder of each different empire not being related to Alessia, since her line did technically end. Then again, you could argue that Remen and Tiber are all related to each other because the dragon blood could get around through many illegitimate heirs, so maybe that isn't the best example. No, the best example would be one of the Septim Empresses, Katariah, who is a Dunmer and to my knowledge anyway, isn't at all related to any royal by blood. She married Pelagius III, the Mad One, and after he got put in an insane asylum, Katariah took over. Without any blood relation, she could still wear the Amulet of Kings, saying to me that Akatosh just chooses whoever the most convenient to carry the dragon blood and wear the Amulet of Kings is. Katariah's son, who she had with her own consort, who's not a Septim, took over later, and also wore the Amulet of Kings, and was only a Septim because of his mother's marriage, not through his blood, which is very confusing. Why make a covenant with a bloodline to just ignore the bloodline? If Akatosh approves of these rulers one at a time with his dragon blood, why bother approving the bad ones? If he can give Katariah the dragon blood to keep the Septim dynasty going through convenience, considering that there were other true Septims about, including her firstborn son, why not do the same for potentate Vizitushe? I hope I got it right that time, who took over for the Second Cyrodiilic Empire when Remen Cyrodiil's bloodline ended. He was distinctly not an emperor, while Katariah was, since she had the Amulet of Kings. So what gives there? Is Dragon Dad a racist? Does he not like snake people? If Akatosh could just pick and choose people, why bother with bloodlines at all? Why not do the Avatar thing of having it be some random person each time, and then he can just pick someone who looks like they're the best for the job? Now, this is of course assuming that Katariah is someone who doesn't have any Septim blood. This is also assuming that literally anyone with Septim, Cyrodiil, or Alessia's blood aren't Dragonborns who can potentially wear the Amulet of Kings. In this video about the Emperors, I mentioned that a common criticism I had for a lot of Emperors was that they had affairs and bastard children, all Robert Baratheon making the 8 style, and we're just talking about the bastards and affairs we know about. There is a chance, however slim, that Katariah is related to the Septims distantly, possibly through Queen Baranziah, who had an affair with Tiber Septim, especially because the two belonged to the same clan. Now, granted, the baby that Baranziah would have had with Tiber Septim was allegedly aborted on the Emperor's orders, but because this is Elder Scrolls lore, this could have been a lie spread for any number of reasons, and the baby could have been kept in secret. That's also assuming Katariah is even related to the Septims, and could have had the dragon blood through Remen or Alessia distantly, but if this is the case, then that means we aren't that special as the last Dragonborn. Sure, we're a Dragonborn hero, potentially a Shezareen, and possibly a Dragon Hunterborn, making us more of a special case, since we've got a whole prophecy and a fancy wall all about us. But this would then imply that there are probably dozens of people wandering around that could have potentially worn the Amulet of Kings. Of course, it's not really relevant by the time of Skyrim because there is no Amulet of Kings, but it would mean that there are plenty of people who could have done what Tiber Septim and Remen did with a proper claim to the Ruby Throne, but just didn't lock in enough, I guess. The final explanation I have for the whole Katariah situation, because I simply refuse to say Bethesda did a weird thing that was probably a bit of a lore oversight, is that she actually gained the dragon blood through her marriage to Pelagius and Mara. Remember, when you get married in Skyrim, it is in a temple of Mara, because that's what the goddess is all about, and perhaps she, with some help from Akatosh, makes the spouses of the emperors and empresses Dragonborn, thus explaining why Katariah's second son, who isn't at all related to Pelagius, was able to use the Amulet of Kings as well. That, or I don't know, Akatosh saw what a mess the Septim bloodline was from Pelagius and decided to make an exception for Katariah to hold down the fort. But even then, I don't know how much Akatosh cares for mortal politics. There could be a combination of the bloodline factor and being chosen. For instance, once Alessia's bloodline ended, Akatosh selected Remen Cyrodiil, then when his line ended, selected Tiber Septim and simply continued the terms of the Covenant with Alessia going forward, but with different bloodlines and people. The slight problem is that if Tiber Septim is the start of a brand new dragon bloodline, it doesn't last very long, because Pelagius I, Tiber Septim's grandson and the second emperor of the dynasty, is succeeded by Empress Katariah, Tiber's niece. Yes, Tiber apparently had a brother, Agnorith, who did basically nothing, but pretty much the entire Septim line can be traced back to him, so, was he made Dragonborn too and just lazy? Granted, Agnorith might not even be real, and Katariah might actually be the bastard daughter of Tiber, but relabelled as his niece to make her rule legitimate. This would probably make more sense than Agnorith actually being real and just doing nothing the whole time except have a daughter.
You're not an intellectual, you're a fake and a fraud!
But one thing I'm glossing over is what the people in Tamriel think about all this. Well, good thing there's a book all about it.
I believe that Martin's sacrifice sealed the gates of oblivion forever. Tamriel no longer needs the protection of the dragon fires.
In Skyrim, there's the Book of the Dragonborn that seeks to kind of explain this mess. It doesn't do an amazing job in the explaining front, but it's an attempt, I guess. Now, the weirdness of Katariah is not explained at all, which I've probably spent half this video talking about, but it does mention that Dragonborns aren't just emperors. It mentions that there are gnawed tales of Dragonborns slaying these giant scaly pigeons and slurping up their souls, which is either in reference to Miraak, which I doubt, or more Dragonborns after Miraak. This could include the High King of Skyrim, Ysmir Wolfhalf, whom Balgruuf mentions as a Dragonborn, and he was known to fight a ghost version of Alduin. Well, I say fight, but he basically called Shaw for help, turned everyone back into adults after they were turned into children, then keeled over. That's a topic for another time, but basically Dragonborns have existed before Alessia, and apparently scholars know about this. It seems like the Dragonborn concept got famous because of Alessia's Covenant, however. It's kinda like Amy Winehouse's cover of Valerie, I guess. But the book also questions whether the Emperor Dragonborns have all the crazy powers of these Dragonborn heroes, and it doesn't give us an answer. Not even a theory. Yeah, thanks for that. The authors of this book just call it a divine mystery, like that's bloody useful. There are also a few things to address about this book, as well as the narrative pushed by the Empire that has subsequently been debunked by the events of Skyrim. One is the idea that there can only be one Dragonborn at a time. We know that this isn't true because Miraak has been an apocrypha since the Merithic era, meaning that there has been at least 2 Dragonborns in existence at most points in history, although obviously Miraak is stuck in apocrypha, so maybe there's a loophole there. The Book of the Dragonborn also mentions that there are several Dragonborn emperors at any given time, at least from a logical standpoint, the current emperor and their heirs. They don't confirm this to be the case, although it kinda does feel like the scholars who wrote this believe it is. Still, I suppose this means that Imperial propaganda pushed the narrative that there is only one Dragonborn at any given time, and they are only made Dragonborn when they don the Amulet of Kings. Mankar Cameron, Oblivion's favourite madman, kinda disproved this in Oblivion, but he rewrote reality with a special knife, so that's cheating. Finally, there's a mention that, while legends state otherwise, there's no evidence that Remen is related to Alessia, meaning that Akatosh's covenant with the Dragonborn Emperors isn't purely hereditary. It is said that between Remen's empire and Tiber's, the Blades went out looking for the next Dragonborn, and I guess eventually found him because they fought alongside Tiber Septim early in his campaigns. This implies that the Blades knew that Akatosh was going to choose a new Dragonborn and lineage, but if this is the case, there's something else that confuses me about us, the last Dragonborn.
In the name of Kine, in the name of Shor, and in the name of Atmora of old, you are Ismir now, the Dragon of the North.
So, theoretically, while not all Dragonborn Emperors got their status through their parents, dragon blood can be passed through a family tree. If this is the case, why are we the last Dragonborn? Don't get me wrong, it's a baller title, and Miraak's line,
"And so the first Dragonborn meets the last Dragonborn at the summit of Apocrypha,"
goes hard. But we can pass our dragon blood to our children, right? I know John Skyrim can't have his own kids in-game and has to adopt, but does that mean he's sterile? Or does that mean everyone who made the prophecy thought John Skyrim would lose to Alduin and that would be it? Did people really have that little faith? Obviously, Bethesda probably didn't want to add a pregnancy mechanic or a child raising mechanic, but I wonder if this means the Dragonborn won't be able to pass on the dragon blood or build a legacy of their own to make their own empire. I guess so, since Bethesda tends to write protagonists out of the story once their game is done. But Dragonborns and Dragon Blood are such pivotal elements to Tamriel that I don't know how Bethesda can feasibly write us out without trapping us somewhere or taking away the last Dragonborn's free will in some way. Being the Dragonborn is a big deal for everyone on the continent, especially because we have undeniable proof, and the dragon blood should matter massively to an empire on its knees, looking for someone to revitalise it. Then again, we might not be that kind of Dragonborn, and we might not be able to use the Amulet of Kings. I'm assuming we could have, but obviously there's no way of proving it because, well, it's in pieces. I don't know, man, Dragonborns confuse me.
Another one. Another one. Another one. Another one. Another one. And another one.
So it hasn't helped that Bethesda wanted to adapt and change the definition of Dragonborns in Skyrim so that we could be this dragon-slaying hero, and I guess you could chalk it up as a minor retcon, but it has caused me quite a bit of confusion. I'm not really clear on the rules and how this came about, and assuming we didn't just pop into existence, which is also another reality, there is a chance that our parents were Dragonborn, and we're part of some Dragonborn lineage, which would make us the final person in said lineage, but that's probably the point. Dragonborns get their gift from a god, and there is meant to be some mystery from the divine. Akatosh in particular is a confusing deity, and check out this video for that, but I do wish that people in-universe would try to offer some explanations, even if those explanations contradict each other, because that would be realistic. Either way, thank you for watching. It has been exactly 1 year since I posted my first video, which is pretty freaky to say. So, happy 1 year anniversary, I guess. Look at where the time's gone. Don't forget to do that YouTube ritual nonsense, you're smart enough to know what that means by now, and hopefully I'll see you in another video. And here's to another year.
When darkness came